unless you're a cyclist or some athlete for whom the actual scale means something. But for people like us, it's you want to lose fat, not weight. And then when you say you want to lose fat, what does that mean in English? Well, do you want fewer fat cells or do you want each fat cell to be smaller? Those are totally different questions. If you want fewer fat cells, have liposuction. But we know that that doesn't fix you metabolically. So if you want to be less fat, you have to have smaller fat cells. Now, a fat cell conceptually has 2 inputs and 1 output. So now I say, let's reframe the question. You got a room with 100 people in it. You want fewer people in the room. What has to happen? More people have to leave the room than enter the room. So similarly, if you have a fat cell and you want it to be less fat, you got to get more fat out of it than enters it. And the fat that exits the cell exits via a process called lipolysis. And the inputs to a fat cell are something called de novo lipogenesis, which is turning carbohydrates into fat, and reesterification, which is turning fat, like in a free fatty acid, into a triglyceride back into a fat cell. Each of those 3 doors is controlled by hormones. And so the purpose of nutrition or fasting or exercise or drugs or hormones or all these things is to manipulate those hormones in the direction of what I call negative fat flux, or what would be referred to in the literature as fat balance, negative fat balance. And the hormones that drive that are many. Insulin, hormone-sensitive lipase, testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, being the 5 most important in my opinion. Maybe someone will disagree with that, but I think those are the 5 that rule the roost. And so, how do you manipulate those? Well, insulin seems to be the most important of the 5, and there's no better way to lower insulin than to not eat. So the first thing that happened to that dude who went 382 days without anything but water and minerals is he basically had very low insulin levels. In fact, once he got into raging ketosis, which he got into by about day 7, his insulin came up only to prevent him from going into ketoacidosis, which was what would happen if he had no insulin response. In other words, if he was a type 1 diabetic, he would have died of ketoacidosis because he wouldn't have had the insulin to regulate the uptick of ketones. But if you or I did this, because we have a normal pancreas, we would actually make just enough insulin to suppress ketogenesis and keep that beta-hydroxybutyrate level in the, kind of in the neighborhood of probably 7 or 8 millimolar, as opposed to getting north of 12 to 15, which is when you get into trouble. So, how do you manipulate insulin? Nutrition is the first way. If you can't fast, the next best thing is to reduce carbohydrates. Carbohydrates obviously are the most insulinogenic of food, although protein can be quite insulinogenic as well. It has a different response. And then that's when you start to think about these other things. I've seen patients where they just can't lose weight. And I watch what they're doing, and they're doing everything right, but they just can't lose weight. But then you notice their cortisol levels through the roof. It's hard to get rid of fat when you have lots of cortisol. Cortisol is a very anabolic hormone to fat and a very catabolic hormone to muscle, which is the exact opposite of what we want. Testosterone, of course, is the exact opposite. Testosterone is catabolic to fat, but anabolic to muscle. And then, of course, women have a harder time because once women go through menopause, they lose all the estrogen and all the testosterone. And so now they lose 2 hormones that play a very important role in regulating this.
So for these people that are having the issue with cortisol levels, that's exacerbated by stress, right?
Yes.
So stress actually exacerbates your weight gain.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's interesting.
In addition to a whole bunch of other stuff.
You could literally eat the same diet and gain more weight because of stress.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Again, hormones are what's driving fuel partitioning. You're responsible for what you put in your mouth, but in many ways at that point, like the hormones take over and decide where it's going.
Have your conservative values moved in one way or another? Have they
I would say
shifted
that
at all?